The room buzzed with energy. Investors, philanthropists, and local business leaders mingled with families invited to preview the program. The air was filled with the soft hum of conversation, punctuated by the occasional laughter of children exploring the interactive sports exhibits. Matthew stood near the stage, surrounded by a few key business associates. His tailored charcoal suit fit perfectly, exuding the quiet authority that always seemed to precede him. Yet as polished as he appeared, his attention kept drifting toward the field in the corner, where kids were kicking around a soccer ball, their laughter carrying through the room. When Emma arrived, she paused at the entrance, her breath catching. The room was bigger, brighter, and far more glamorous than she'd imagined. Liam tugged at her hand, his excitement cutting through her nerves. "Mom, look," he said, pointing to the mini field set up near the stage. "Can I go?" Emma smiled despite herself. "Go ahead, sweetheart." As Liam ran off, Emma adjusted her dress, a simple yet elegant emerald green she'd chosen herself. It brought out the warmth in her brown eyes, but she couldn't help feeling a little out of place among the tailored suits and glittering jewelry. "Emma," a familiar voice said. She turned to see Matthew approaching, his smile warm despite the formal setting. He looked every bit the CEO she now knew him to be, yet his demeanor was as approachable as it had been at the park. "You made it," he said, his tone lighter than the polished air of the room. Emma raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a teasing smile. "And miss this? Not a chance." Matthew glanced toward Liam, who was already darting across the field. "Looks like he's making himself at home." Emma followed his gaze, her expression softening. "This is incredible, Matthew. I mean, it's bigger than I imagined." "Maybe a little bigger than necessary," he admitted with a small chuckle. "But it's the kind of thing that gets people's attention. The more support we have, the more kids we can reach." Emma looked at him, her smile fading into something more serious. "You really believe in this, don't you?" Matthew nodded, his voice quieter now. "I do, and I wouldn't have gotten here without you." Before Emma could respond, an assistant stepped up to Matthew's side. "Mr. Harrington, it's time for your speech." Matthew gave Emma an apologetic smile. "Don't let Liam wear out the field before I'm back," he said lightly before heading toward the stage. Matthew stepped onto the stage with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned his place there. The room stilled as he adjusted the microphone, his presence commanding attention without effort. "Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here tonight. In my career, I've learned that success isn't just about what you achieve. It's about the impact you leave behind. And that's what tonight is about. Impact. This program started as an idea, a way to give kids opportunities they might not otherwise have. It's not just about sports. It's about what sports can teach: discipline, resilience, teamwork, and leadership. These are the same principles that drive successful businesses, the same qualities that create strong communities. So tonight, I invite you to join me, not just as supporters, but as partners. Let's create something lasting. Let's build something that matters." As the applause swelled, Matthew stepped back, his expression steady and composed. Investors leaned into quiet discussions, families exchanged hopeful smiles, and the energy in the room was undeniable. Matthew descended the stage with the same quiet assurance he'd shown at the start, his handshakes firm, his conversations purposeful. He wasn't just an heir or a figurehead, he was Matthew Harrington, a leader who knew exactly how to turn vision into reality. Amid the applause and murmurs of approval, Matthew caught a familiar presence entering the room. Richard Harrington strode through the main hall, his polished shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. His tailored suit was impeccable, his sharp eyes scanning the room like a general surveying his troops. Beside him, Eleanor Harrington moved with equal precision, her pearls glinting under the soft lighting. They paused occasionally to greet a select few, exchanging measured smiles and nods with investors and influential figures. It wasn't casual, it was calculated. Everyone who mattered was made aware of their presence, their unspoken superiority settling over the room like a veil. Matthew noticed them from across the room, his jaw tightening. He had hoped they wouldn't show, but deep down, he knew better. The Harringtons rarely did anything without an agenda. He watched as they worked the room, making sure their reputation remained intact, even as their disdain for the event was palpable. When they finally made their way to the private room, Matthew followed, leaving the warmth of the event behind. The door clicked shut behind him, muting the cheerful hum of the crowd. Richard stood by the window, his back to Matthew, his hands clasped behind him. Eleanor had already taken a seat, her posture perfect as she smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her cream-colored skirt. "So, this is your grand idea," Richard said without turning around. His voice was calm, almost bored, but the weight of his disapproval was unmistakable. Matthew crossed his arms. "It is," he said simply, keeping his tone neutral. Richard finally turned, gesturing vaguely toward the door. "A charity program for children. How quaint." "It's more than that," Matthew replied, his voice measured. Richard tilted his head, a faint smirk playing at his lips. "More? Matthew, this is a sideshow. You should be focusing on legacy, on building something worthy of the Harrington name. Instead, you're dabbling in sentimentality." Matthew's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He knew better than to take the bait. Eleanor's voice cut through the tension like ice. "And this woman," she said, her words slow and deliberate. "A single mother, is it? Surely you're not serious, Matthew. You could have anyone. Why, settle." Matthew's chest tightened, but he remained still, his expression unreadable. Richard stepped closer, his tone softening but no less condescending. "Touchy, are we? Come now, son. You've been distracted before, but this is beneath you. You know that." For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of conversation beyond the door. Then Matthew spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "You didn't want to attend Gwen's funeral," he said evenly. "But here you are. Let me guess. You couldn't resist coming to see if the rumors were true?" Eleanor's lips thinned, but she said nothing. Matthew allowed a faint, bitter smile to touch his lips. "Well, thank you for showing up. I'll be sure to tell the investors how much your support means to the program." Without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked toward the door. Richard called after him, his tone hardening. "This isn't over, Matthew." Matthew paused briefly, glancing back over his shoulder. "You're right," he said, his words clipped. "It's just beginning." He left them in the silence they deserved, stepping back into the warmth and light of the event. Matthew found Emma near the field, her arms crossed as she watched Liam play. When she turned to him, her expression softened. "Everything okay?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "It is now." She tilted her head slightly, sensing there was more to his words than he was letting on. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" she asked. "For reminding me why this matters," he replied. "You and Liam, You've made me see things differently, and I can't thank you enough for that." Emma flushed slightly, but smiled. "You're welcome, but don't expect me to start calling you a saint just yet." Matthew chuckled. "Fair enough." As the evening drew to a close, Matthew stood by the field, watching as Liam darted across it, his jersey a blur of color. For years, Matthew had built his life around wealth and power. But tonight, he saw something richer, a legacy that wasn't measured in numbers, but in the lives it touched. And as he looked at Emma, her smile warm and unguarded, he realized this was just the beginning of something far greater than he'd ever imagined. It was time his parents understood that too, or at least accepted it. The life he was building wasn't about their vision of legacy, but his own. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to build bridges, not out of obligation, but from the hope of finding something better.